So, in the earlier lectures, I talked about gradient of a scalar field. Today, I will discuss a new concept, that is divergence and curl. So, as I know in the earlier lectures that if phi is a scalar quantity, phi is a scalar field, then del phi is a vector. And it is clear in the earlier lectures. So here because this del operator, it is a del operator and it is a vector operator, and phi is a scalar field, and their product is again a vector quantity, right? Because it's a product of these two quantities, as I have seen in the earlier lecture. But there is a possibility, if this del operator, it operated with some vector field, say it is a vector field, and if it operates with it, then there are two possibilities. First possibility is del dot some vector field, and it is del cross some vector field. So right, so these are the two possibilities about which I am talking about. Now let me briefly do one thing. Means this is basically del dot A, and here it can be written as del cross A, where A is what? A is a vector quantity. A is a, sorry, not a vector quantity, but it is a vector field, right? So these are the two possibilities. Then, keeping these two possibilities in mind, mathematically this is known as divergence of a vector field, of a vector field. And what do we call it as? This is called as curl of a vector field. Right? So let us understand this by taking an example. So example is, let us say that E is the vector field, and it can be written as EXI cap, EYJ cap, and EZK cap. So now this del dot E means divergence of vector field E. It can be written as curly over curly X I cap plus curly over curly Y J cap plus curly over curly Z K cap into E X I cap, E Y J cap, and E Z K cap. And if I try to look at it, it's like a dot product of two vectors. It looks like that. So if it is like that, then how do I write down? This part can be written as, it is curly Ex over curly X, curly Ey over curly Y, plus curly Ez over curly Z's. And if I try to look at it, then this is a scalar quantity. This is a scalar quantity. And if I try to look at the another part, this is the one part about which I talked about here, and let me talk about this part. So for this part, say this is the del vector, and I want to find out del cross E. So if I recall cross product of two vectors, then that can be written as like this. Means it's like a curly over curly x I cap, curly over curly y j cap, curly over curly z k cap, and it's basically, sorry, yeah, it is ex I cap, ey j cap, ez k cap. So if I put all these values here, then it is I cap, j cap, it is k cap, curly over curly x, curly over curly y, curly over curly z, it is ex, ey, and it is ez, right? So, and if we try to look at this quantity, then this is a scalar quantity, this is a, sorry, this is a also a vector quantity. So right, so thus I talked about here two things. One is the divergence of a vector field, and another I talked about a curl of a vector field, about which I talked about here, right? So this is all about divergence and curl of a vector fields. So that's all for this lecture, and in the next lecture I will talk about meaning of divergence of a vector field.